Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Respected shuyukh, ai colleagues, friends, peers, students, teachers. I am honored and flattered by also by my colleague Dr. Umar Isso's introduction. I know him, sometimes he exaggerates, but I suppose he means well. But we should always remain humble in the eyes of Allah. So shukran for that elaborate introduction, which I don't deserve, because all praise is due to Allah. And inshallah, I will share with you some of the things which I think is pertinent to consider in the pursuit of your endeavor, which is an intellectual one. I don't claim to have the last word on it. I've never done that in all the works that I've produced. And if I make certain errors, I ask Allah for forgiveness. So let me begin. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wakhlul uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. I would like to introduce my talk with Surah Hujurat, Ayah 13. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Ya ayyuhan nasu inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا إِنَّ أَكْرَمَكُمْ عِندَ اللَّهِ أَتْقَاكُمْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ عَلِيمٌ خَبِيرٌ. صدق الله العظيم. So, if one looks at the concept of faith that the Muslim thinker imagines to espouse, then I cannot think of a more appropriate way to introduce my presentation. And that's the premise of my thinking, the Quran. It might not be as articulate and eloquent as it should be, but we remain beings in becoming. We remain imperfect beings in the making. So I remember one of my philosophical teachers who said, if you make a mistake, that's a high form of virtue. It's the highest form of virtue, because you will reconsider your mistake to produce a more tenable argument. Now that to me lies at the basis of my thinking, which means that everything you espouse or elucidate or want to make clear or say can never ever be tenable in itself. It is always subjected to scrutiny, analysis, criticism, and improvement. Simply put, if you want to say something better, open yourself up to criticism by others and to others, so that when you articulate it, you will do it more eloquently. So there is no excuse, or there is no punishment if you make a mistake, if you err. Error is what the famous Western scholar Karl Popper said. Error is the best form of learning. Learning through mistakes is the most appropriate form of learning. So even in my presentation today, I hope I make a few mistakes so that I can learn. So let me start off. What do I want to say? Let me sketch you a very bleak picture before I offer you a response. We are living in a world permeated by neo-fascism. Now, neo is a prefix of the word fascism. Neo means it takes on a different form, but it is still fascism. Now, what does fascism mean? Fascism means that power is centralized in the control of a minority. Listen to what I'm saying. Power is concentrated within the hands of a minority. And what do? They want to exclude dissenting voices. And that's what neo-fascism implies. And when dissenting voices are excluded, critical thinking is truncated or constrained or impeded or opposed, resisted. And that's the era we live in. I don't have to mention names. I can feel it on our own continent. I can feel it in my own society. I can even feel that in the own institution that I represent. Now, what has happened? Because of the obsession with control and manipulation of people's minds, a few in the world decided that we're going to use money to buy other people and make them like us. And if we make them like us, our clones, we can control the world. I can give you a few names. Elon Musk, by the way, he's a South African who emigrated to the US with Donald Trump. Marine Le Pen in France. Look at Boris Johnson, who initiated Brexit. Look at Xi Jinping, who wants to centralize ideas in China, and look at what he's doing in Taiwan. And then, of course, look at Putin. Look at the Ukraine-Russian war. It's ongoing. Those are prime examples of neo-fascist rulers. It's a form of totalitarianism, of completely taking over the thinking in the world. And when that happens, authoritarianism manifests. Control, and more control. You can never speak your mind. Now that, to me, I serve on the Council for Higher Education, but don't speak here as a Council for Higher Education member. But in a meeting of the Council of Higher Education, we identified several problems that would challenge South African universities today. Most of us believe it's a lack of resources, it's money, it's funding. No. I said, no, it's not that. What is our biggest challenge at every one of the 26 public universities we have in this country, and don't forget the private ones, is the fact that we are challenged by authoritarianism, meaning we don't have a right to speak our minds. Wow, that's a serious indictment on the very notion of a university. If you don't have the right to speak your mind, if you are opposed to say what you want to say, then that university is in trouble. That is the serious challenge we face on the African continent today, that we are inhibited from speaking openly and freely. And we are constrained in our thinking. You try it. You ask for funding from particular organizations, from particular bodies, and then you'll experience it. Because those who control the purse, the resources, the financial resources, they dictate. But, fortunately, we will go to universities. We will go to where universitas began. And university comes from the Latin word universitas, meaning the whole, the totality. In Arabic, it is better to talk about jamia, because it's not just the totality, but it is also the intersection between what is total within the community of thinkers as well as what lies beyond. And that's what makes the Jamia different from the university per se. It makes the liberal university different. What makes the liberal university different from the university as espoused in the Muslim tradition is exactly that nothing beyond the university is ever excluded. So, let me not talk about the Jamia for now. Let me just talk about the university, the modern liberal university as we understand it today. That university is in trouble, whether it is Pretoria, University of Cape Town, University of the Witwatersrand, Stellenbosch University, the University of the Western Cape, just to mention a few. And I specifically started off with Pretoria because if there's something that I resent, and I think it's very unhealthy for the production of knowledge, is that we list these universities and institutions according to a ranking. I mean, we are so obsessed with metrics. Oh, is your university the top university today? I mean, why can't the Islamic Peace University of South Africa be the top university? No. Or what makes you say that the University of the Western Cape is far better? Of course, you rely on the rankings. So you look at what universities are listed on the Shanghai rankings or the Times Higher Education Supplement. And then they do give you a ranking. I mean, our institution is very elated because we have been grouped. In fact, our faculty has been grouped among the first 200 universities in the world. So whatever rankings they use, they say this about us. So Dr. Umar is very excited to know that he's in one of the leading faculties in the world today. That's how they rank you. And when they rank you, they bracket you. And then we forget about the essence of what a university should be about. Now, you ask me, there are three things that a university does, and I'm going to be very simplistic. I used to relate this to my children when they ask me, Dad, what should I tell people when they ask me what you do? I said, I hope you don't tell them certain things which you can't explain. So just tell them, I read, I write, and I talk. That's all. And that's what universities does. People read, they write, and they talk. Now, you can use all kinds of sophisticated terminology for that, but that is actually what they do. But if they don't do that, they're not doing the work that they should be doing. And I can tell you, there are many working at institutions that hide behind the notion of reading, writing, and talking. That's a very provocative statement to make, but I want to make that statement. So, when universities are there to espouse ideas into society, they are obliged to justify it. In other words, you cannot just say something without providing the evidence for it. So, universities have organized themselves according to various disciplines. Yeah, it's important to talk about disciplines, which suggests that you might find yourself working in a particular discipline different to somebody else. So your discipline and my discipline might not commensurate, might not be the same, and it shouldn't be. Because that will make a university renowned for its diversity of views and perspectives. So they don't say the same thing. They articulate different understandings of what it means to produce knowledge. Now I've used the word knowledge for the first time, because that is what we do. I always say, when we read and we write, we construct, and together with misconstruct, because we are not infallible. So we write, and we are prone to mistakes, that's what I mean. And we reconstruct, meaning after looking again, We think differently about matters, so we reconstruct, and sometimes we throw away what we don't require, but we look beyond the margins. In other words, we look at the things that we haven't thought about. And when we do that, we deconstruct. So a university does three things in relation to reading and writing and talking. People, humans, because that's who scholars are, they construct meanings, they reconstruct meanings, that's one. They deconstruct ideas, that's the three already, sorry. So it's construct, reconstruct, and deconstruct. And that's what they do. But there are certain things in the world that you do and where you do it. And when university scholars, I'm using that word for the first time, when they do that, they make their ideas, their thoughts, their stories, their narratives public. And when they do that, they publish it either in a book, or in a book chapter, or in a journal article, as a journal article in a journal rather. And that's when they announce themselves to the world. This is what they have to say. And let me just put in a disclaimer here. What has happened nowadays is the emergence of ChatGPT and DeepSeek. It's two AI-operated systems. We have now asked ChatGPT and AI to say a few things for us. There's no harm in using ChatGPT and AI, but please, if you do it, and if you don't do it smartly, ChatGPT will give you a different understanding to the very work that you ask ChatGPT to comment on. Try it and you'll see it. What I mean by that, I don't have an objection when you use AI to articulate your thoughts better, but it has to be your thoughts, which you take ownership of. What has happened is the converse. Some of us have asked ChatGPT for thoughts, and then we made it our own. In other words, ChatGPT has this repository, this box of information, and it only takes from there because it's familiar with what exists. So I explain that very simplistically. So it's a box, there's a lot of information. I extract information from there and put it in a nice form. And it looks so perfect that you might think there's no mistakes. But I can tell you, I've used it since it emerged. It can put you into trouble. So don't rely extensively on ChatGPT to articulate your thoughts, because you might end up in a situation whereby those thoughts are not yours. Because ChatGPT is the AI program that has access to all the thoughts that are in there. So for me, a way out is to say what you want to say. Speak your mind. Put it in ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT, can you say it better? But then revisit that thought again, because it might not articulate it in a more improved way as you already have it. So that's a disclaimer. Construction of knowledge, reconstruction of knowledge, and the deconstruction of knowledge, that is what universities do. And that is under threat by this whole notion of authoritarianism. You cannot just say what you want to say. You have to abide and comply by X, Y, and Z. So your freedom of thought and openness is under threat. And that's the biggest challenge. And when your freedom of thought is under threat, and you can no longer openly articulate yourself, defend yourself, then the university is in a crisis. And that's where we are. We are in a predicament. Why? Because of neo-fascism that's hovering around here and that is influencing the way our universities are guided and constructed on the continent. Now, the question that I'm asking, how can that be addressed? And this is the reason why I draw on the notion of ta'aruf. Not just about lita'arafu, in order that we know one another, yes, but when we get to know one another, Allah says in the Quran, I have created you from a male and a female. And then I've created you, organized you in tribes and nations. I've organized you in different communitarian spaces. Allah says that. I've organized you in different communities in order that you get to know one another. Get to know one another, lita'arafu. Get to know one another, that you get to encounter one another, who you are, what you become. Who you are and what you become. Which means that the construction of knowledge is not necessarily an independent endeavor. Now, that to me makes sense. When I started reading philosophy, I had to draw on Plato, Aristotle, Ibn Rushd, Al-Ghazali, to construct a particular thought. And those thoughts exist. It's not just that it comes to mind independently and intuitively. It does come intuitively. But you've also read and encountered others' works, which you draw on to substantiate the truth claims you make, you proffer. So no one can say that those are my independent thoughts. The Ta'arafu suggests that knowledge is as a consequence of constructing together. So I always tell my students, I have never known Aristotle. I've never met him. But yes, I have drawn upon understandings of virtue associated with his thinking. And how do I do that? By having read the Nicomachean Ethics. Such a long name. Nicomachean Ethics. Because that's when you encounter his works. Another scholar's work I've relied extensively on is, he's still alive, I mean, a man still writing at the age of 94. Professor Dr. Said Naguib Al-Attas. When I want to read his metaphysics, and I rely on the books that I'm engaging with. I rely on the conversations that I have with him. The man still has conversations with you at the age of 90, plus 94. So we have to be grateful. The point I'm making, you don't construct knowledge as an engineer, a medical practitioner, an educator, a philosopher, an alim in the Muslim tradition. You don't construct it independently. You construct, reconstruct in conjunction with what you encounter, because you read works. And that's why in the intellectual tradition you always reference your sources. Dr. Umar will tell you, you don't just write, you reference the sources you use. Because if you don't reference the sources, those who read your work will say, but why is the scholar writing without sources? But I'm not talking about the scholars who write using all the sources, but have never read the sources, never accessed. That's also the converse that can happen. You want to augment your bibliography, your reference list, so you list all the sources, but you've never even read one of the sources extensively. That's what we call academic perjury, isn't it? Now, genuine scholars don't do that. So what am I saying? I'm saying that faculty, yes, faculty will persist. And faculty will only persist if the construction, reconstruction, and deconstruction of knowledge remains central to the work of faculty. There's something that annoys me about the South African faculty. We are required to list the number of publications we produce annually. And South Africa, the Department of Higher Education and Training, has made it compulsory for universities to report your research outputs, to report it, because on the basis of your research outputs, you will be funded. So we are obliged to submit the articles we publish, the books we produce, the chapters we produce, on the basis of what the department then acknowledges and gives you money for. I mean, roughly speaking, roughly, you get you generate 120,000 rand for a university, for your university, if you publish an article which is accredited in a journal by the DHET. It's a lot of money. Just think of it. If you do 10 of that, you earn more than R1 million for your institution. That's why the rat race has begun. The rat race is escalating. So one person wants to make sure that she runs the race, or he, in order to produce that publication for the sake of generating money. It's a rat race. It's a highly competitive rat race, and it's something which annoys me. Unless you change the funding system, then you will do the things that the scholars summoned you to do. They summoned you to produce knowledge for the sake of knowledge, for the love of it, for the passion of it. Because if you do that intrinsically, it comes from inside. But if you do it for reward, for promotion, for recognition, you do it mostly for show. And that's the extrinsic disaster of knowledge production. And that's what concerns me the most of our universities of our faculty in this country. I remember, you ask any institution in the world. I remember when I asked my colleagues, now, what is the best education journal on theory and philosophy in the world? So they told me, but it's not accredited. I said, I didn't ask whether it's accredited. Accredited means the state will give it subsidy. The South African government will give it subsidy, will subsidize it. I'm asking my peers, give me the best. They told me it's not accredited. You're not going to get money for it. I said, but that's the reason why I want to publish in that journal. Because if it is considered by its peers as the most reputable, you don't have to care. What is there about this obsession about neoliberalism and money and profit? We in any case use the money to destroy one another. My final comment, because I think I don't have much time left. You indicated that I should stop, or should I stop? Okay, this is my last point I want to make. I'm teasing you. I think the university as an institution, the faculty, I'm talking about the faculty, what the faculty should be doing is something, it's twofold. Now, I get this idea from my own learning. I was always wondering, growing up in the heart of District 6, and now you know where I come from, why did my grandfather insist? Listen to him. What my grandfather did. Why did this grandfather of mine insist I go to the madrasa and learn together with others? So he sent me there to Ellesmere Street. And there was this remarkable Imam Simon. The man's eloquence, which he, in reciting the Quran, which he didn't get much credit for, but that's how I know him. So why did he insist I go there? That is when I saw for the first time, at the age of 10, he grouped people in a halqa, in a circle, and we had to recite. Yusef, recite. Umar, recite. Adnan, it's your turn. Then he came to this decision. Repeat. Wow. Repeat. Over again? Yes. In the modern day, we say, so you are actually a rote learner. I say, yes, yes. So what is wrong with rote learning? I'm not criticizing rote learning. How would you remember verses of the magnanimous Quran if you did not memorize it through rote? It's not possible. I mean, Warda reminded me I was a physics teacher this morning. Okay. So I asked her, was I a good physics teacher? She said yes. But Warda will tell you, when I taught physics, I told the learners, you must memorize the periodic table. You must memorize the first 20 elements of the periodic table if you want to do formulae. If you want to write chemical equations, you have to know those formulae. So, how would I ever know the periodic table? I still know it today. I know and this is not boastfulness, because we were forced to do it. We were invited to do it, summoned to do it. But you cannot write chemical equations, Warda, you know that, without knowing the formulae. How can you do that? So there are certain things in life which we must memorize. So rote learning is not a joke. Those who want to discount rote learning, think again. Yes, rote learning is important, but in that khalqa we also learn something else. And this is the point I want to make. When you do it over, you even take a step back, and then you're reminded, no, it should be so. So your learning becomes, this is the point I want to make, rhythmic. It's a form of advancing forward. You go forward, you want to do it so well, but then there's a sudden interruption. Modern scholars call it, there's a rupture. There's a rupturing of learning. And this disruption in your learning allows you to go back and hold back and then advance again. So this to and fro movement of learning, it comes from the khalqa, comes from the way in which the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam initiated his companions into forms of learning. We use it. We might not have been told that's a form of rhythmic learning, because it's a matter of advancing and withholding. But today, in higher education today, it's the most plausible form of learning they have found. So, what I am saying, that form of rhythmic action, what it does, this is the last point, what it does then, and now I use highfalutin language again, if you theorize, you think about the way your theories will manifest in activities, in practice. So this kind of rhythmic learning is a way of continuing the theorization of knowledge into the pragmatic side of knowledge. And it does overcome this opposition between theory and practice. And if we know, in other words, what I'm saying is something very simple, but we might not give it too much thought. If there's something that we think about, because that's a theory, and we have the evidence for it, that's your theory. If that something can unfold in practices, then your theory informs the practice. And equally, if what happens in the practice reinforces your theory, there is this non-bifurcation, this non-separation between what the theory is and what the practice is. The mistake that is being made in many spheres of learning is we erroneously dichotomize theory and practice. But what rhythmic education or learning is about is to bring theory and practice into harmony. And this is the reason why I think the Quran is so emphatic when it says, لِتَعَارَفُوا, in order that we connect with one another and know one another. So only when you connect and know one another do you in fact encounter one another. Because through that particular encounter you can agree and you can dissent. You can disagree. And if there's disagreement, there's genuine learning. How would a university look like? How would a faculty look like if we agree on every single point? There might not be advanced learning, but if there's moments of dissent and we recognize a different point of view, a dissenting point of view, the possibility is always there for more authentic learning. So in conclusion, I trust that with my simple presentation, that we will begin to think differently about this mutual integration between our faculty and our faith and what the future ought to be. Because the future can never be framed in advance. We are not prophets. The future can be worked towards. I want to conclude with an eminent scholar. She was a philosopher of education, and she died in the late 80s. She was the author of a much publicized book called Releasing the Imagination, and her name was Maxine Green. When I read Maxine Green, I read her in this way. She says that when we think of our education, higher education, we must think it as a moment of discovery, as the opening of a breakthrough, like what happened to her. Well, like what happened to her. She said, and she was and the reason why I quote her is for this reason, she was the president of the biggest education society in the world. And she said, when they praised her, she responded, I am not yet. Now, if someone who has made such a profound contribution to our thinking in education says, I am not yet. There's a book released by the famous curriculum scholar Bill Piner, entitled, I am not yet. When she said, I am not yet, then I realized, wow, what a profound statement. Because knowledge, how we construct it, how we reconstruct it, and how we deconstruct it, remains in the making. There cannot be any finality about knowledge. And that to me makes sense. If we say that the Quran is the ultimate Quran, the final word of Allah, agree. But there is no final interpretation of it. Interpretation is ever evolving. It remains in becoming. Why? Because humans interpret it. And humans are fallible. And they do make mistakes. They err. And therefore the Quran is such an exciting text to engage with. Because meanings and meaning making remain in the making, in becoming. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Shukran for your attention.